The 1930s to the 1940s was a massive period of innovation. After all, when the war makes it legal to blow someone's brains out, really gets the creative juices kicking. I just woke up in the year 1940. Let's see what the new decade has to offer. The Holocaust, Pearl Harbor, Italy and Germany declare war on the United States, the Great Depression just ended. Holy shit, they just invented the microwave oven? Anyways, elements astatine, neptunium, americium, and plutonium discovered. Yep, that just about covers it. So to set the stage for what would eventually be the US purposefully and knowingly experimenting with potentially hazardous materials on US citizens, we have to fully realize just how new this element was at the time. Now look at the periodic table during Enrico Fermi's time. Looks similar, no big deal, a few gaps. These elements would eventually be filled with the likes of francium, astatine, einsteinium, and in fact, the majority of the bottom row of the transition metals are missing. So at this point in time, they were trying to create a new element. What differentiates elements from each other are the number of protons. When you look at the little squares on the periodic table, you have the name, symbol, atomic weight, which is the total weight of an atom including protons, neutrons, and electrons. And then we have the atomic number, which is a different amount of protons. 1 proton is hydrogen, the standard, 2 is helium, 3 is lithium, so on, so on. While protons are important, neutrons can differ to which somewhat defined on how stable an element is. Uranium-238 is abundant in nature and stable. It's radioactive, but bananas are radioactive too due to the fact that potassium is the tiniest bit radioactive, so nothing too special. Uranium-235, which can become fissile on the other hand. Anyways, the reason why I'm talking about protons is to talk and emphasize why I think the discovery of plutonium is particularly humorous to me, and only me really. We'll have to talk about beta-minus decay. When you have an atom that's unstable, it'll try to find stability by converting one of its extra neutrons into a proton, and as a result, will dangerously fire off electrons and neutrinos to account for that energy imbalance. The end result is an element with an extra proton, aka a new element. Now the discovery of plutonium was by Glenn Seaborg and his team, with his last name Seaborg being decided by an immigration officer's half-assed attempt at his Swedish name Sjöborg, with his first name being Glenn, before changing to Glenn because the extra N looked cool. Now the actual idea of the process was mostly from Edwin McMillan, but Seaborg was the first to actually try to do the process. So if you just shoot a neutron and proton at uranium, the proton turns into neptunium, and then the neutron would have a chance at beta decaying it, giving it another proton, turning it into none other than plutonium. Basically a total shot in the dark. The one thing to do when all else fails, smash protons and neutrons together fast. Really fast. So then he got drafted into the Manhattan Project, when they experimented and made enough to make atomic bombs. Since it was actually better fuel for an atomic bomb than uranium. And it seems like this little project had a lot of oopsies. An example being when a lead brick destroyed a beaker and, oops, 25 of the world's entire plutonium supply was soaked into a copy of Chicago Times newspaper. In their defense, they really had no idea what a nuclear bomb would truthfully be like, and it's rumored that some physicists thought that it could potentially ignite the entire atmosphere itself, and the scientists working on this didn't even necessarily know what a nuclear bomb looked like. So them making mistakes is to be expected, with a scientist by the name of Donald Mastick quite literally ingesting it after it exploded into a vial that he was holding plutonium chloride in. While they didn't necessarily know the effects on the human body, they did certainly know that wouldn't be positive. In 1944, early tests with lab rats indicated plutonium concentrating itself in the bones, but the Manhattan Project thought, you know what, How about we try this on humans? In 1945, they were given approval for human testing, with the experiments taking 18 people aged 4 to 69 through 3 tests. April 10th at the Manhattan Project Army Hospital in Oak Ridge, April 26th at Billings Hospital in Chicago, and May 14th at the University of California Hospital in San Francisco. With the story we're concerned with at California Hospital, the man behind this experiment was Dr. Joseph Hamilton, who eventually died of leukemia that was most definitely caused by prolonged exposure to radiation. The 18 people were all chosen because they were thought to have been terminally ill, with Albert Stevens being a 58-year-old house painter, chosen because of his diagnosis of terminal stomach cancer, given a measly 6 months to live. After all, he's gonna die soon enough, so who cares? Ethics? All I hear is a nagging voice at the back of my conscience. And since the discovery of plutonium was not disclosed publicly, due to the fact that they didn't want the Germans and filthy commies getting any funny ideas, the experiment was done without consent. So, Albert Stevens was injected straight with plutonium. After the trials on being injected with plutonium, Albert Stevens underwent surgery for his stomach cancer. Prior to this, he never had a gastroscopy due to the fact that they were fairly sure he did indeed have cancer, only to open him up and remove parts of his stomach, liver, spleen, lymph nodes, pancreas, and ribs to prevent the spread of cancer, which was then sent back to the labs to study the effects of plutonium, where they in fact realized he never had cancer. It was nothing but a benign ulcer. Well, shit boys, better pack up. Not having my license revoked here. Stephen frequently supplied urine and stool samples to be studied, and when he recovered and was discharged from the hospital, even after they still collected these samples under the pretense of studying his miraculous recovery from cancer, with Manhattan District paying for these samples to keep him in the San Francisco area. His wife and daughter did become suspicious, but they had thought that he was a guinea pig for a new cancer treatment that had worked. And his son on hospital checkups even said that there was a history of cancer in the family because he believed his father had it but recovered. After these experiments, he lived a good 20 years after, dying in 1966 of heart failure. Along with other patients in the experiment dying by then, he outlived the other patients by a long shot. To be fair, they did have terminal illness, so it's not unexpected and unprecedented, and it was determined none of them died directly because of health issues that were thought to have been caused directly and indirectly because of plutonium exposure. So the experiment was a success. 10 years after his injection, a radiologist did note some deterioration in parts of his spine and discs, consistent with plutonium gathering in the bones, but for the most part, he lived without side effects. Upon his death, he was cremated where they tested he had a whopping 64 sieverts, or 3 doses of plutonium per year. The annual permitted dose for radiation workers is 0.05 sievert. Stevens was 60 times that amount. A single dose of 10 sieverts would be plenty enough to kill you. So think about Stephen, and he wasn't even aware of it. In fact, no one was, until it was uncovered in the 1990s. I find it quite ironic that despite all of this happening to him because he was diagnosed with cancer, he must have been incredibly cancer resistant, considering the fact that he had not developed tumors or more severe health issues in that time. In fact, he has had the highest dose of radiation of any human being to have lived. With them doing all these experiments, they could be putting radioactive materials anywhere. In the air, in the phones, in the cereal. Oh wait, yep. Turns out the new Kellogg-sponsored cereal is MIT and radiation In the late 1940s, ending in the early 1950s, MIT and Harvard purposely gave out children's cereal that contained small amounts of radioactive iron and calcium. This experiment happened at Walter E. Forneld School, a school for retarded children, led by nutritionist Robert S. Harris, who would even encourage children to join the science club because they would take them on field trips and give them larger portions of food. The National Institutes of Health, the Atomic Energy Commission, and the Quaker Oats Company funded the research. So next time you buy some Quaker Oats, be careful what that man's up to with his smile. High blood pressure? Or poisoning you? The purpose of these experiments was to see how calcium and iron made its way to the bones from ingestion, with the radioactive part making it easier to track. And in 1961, Harvard again administered radioactive iodine to 70 children at Wentham State School, another school for retarded children, a 2-for-1. This time, to measure how much iodine would counteract and effectively block radioactive iodine that would be released in the aftermath of a nuclear fallout. Obviously, children are way more at risk to radiation than full-grown adults. An example being in Vanderbilt Hospital, multiple pregnant women were given radioactive pills, and by the time it came out, 3 out of the 7 women's children were dead from the effects, with them dying at very young ages from tumors and cancer. And this doesn't count up the early health issues or shorter lifespans of the others, so children generally don't fare so well to radiation. But from what I read, the follow-ups on the patients showed no deaths or immediate health issues. Oh, and I stress immediate, because while they didn't have any issues on the follow-ups, this put them at considerable risk in the future. You can't account for them getting cancer earlier than most, developing health issues not present at the time of checking on them, and the overall shorter lifespan than if they didn't get exposed. If Albert Stevens had not been exposed, I wouldn't be surprised if he had lived another 10 to 15 years. But since you can't measure ifs and what didn't happen, we'll never know. With these students, the parents consented, but wasn't exactly descriptive on what they were doing, with them describing it as a project in which their children would receive a special diet rich in irons and vitamins. Damn, sign me up! With the only really experiment being them taking occasional blood work to check up on them, with them assuring there'd be no discomfort or physical health problems, with the prospect that they could even improve. Again, there's no mention of any risks or the use of radioisotopes. Granted, even if you did explain it to the parents, I don't think they'd particularly get it. And since this was the 1940s to early 1950s, I doubt that these facilities housing disabled children were that great, as historically, these facilities were more about dumping the unwanted of society into a hidden corner rather than rehabilitate them back into society. So yeah, that sucks. But of course, when it comes to human experimentation in any regard, they still won't do it nearly as willy-nilly nowadays, with something called basic human rights now. And cause overall they aren't as keen for saying, huh? You want a child to experiment on? Yeah, taking down those filthy commies, eh? Take this one right here and be on your merry way, old neighbor, you know? Back then was so much better. I guess it is true that I was born in the wrong generation, because nowadays if you want to experiment on children, you'll have to have something called a reason. But the story has a somewhat happy ending somewhat, with the Massachusetts Task Force addressing the experiments as inhumane and as a violation of human rights, which isn't a whole lot, but quite amicable compared to the likes of not telling your subjects and having it come out in 1993 due to a scandal after almost all your patients are dead. Of course, though, that wouldn't happen. Most experiments probably fall under this category. And these are just the cases we know about. There's so many more we're unaware of. Maybe someday I'll get to Unit 731, but Japan's war crimes constitute as an entirely different video. Also, fun fact, since this could be a potential forced video depending on if I have the space on my computer, Technically actually my third video, but this video in particular went through a lot of rewrites. I'm passionate about chemistry, so to speak. So the original was just me talking about nuclear fission and giving visuals to how chemistry works. But since I would probably be a snooze fest of people not understanding it because I can't put it into layman's terms because I don't have that well of an understanding of it, it read more like a science thesis from someone who doesn't know what they're doing than a video people would actually enjoy. So I hope I didn't bore you. And if I did, I don't care. So that's it. I've barely scraped the surface of human experimentation, so comment some examples down below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. That's all I've got. See you later.
Your neighbor down the street, your cousin down the road, they can be all victims to the horrors of radiation. The effects cannot be even miles away from the blast site. Radiation poisoning. You need to know about radiation. What is it? How to detect it? And what to do to protect yourself and your family against it. Everybody needs to know. Yes, even you, because one day these facts may save you and your precious community members' lives. Now you may ask, what is fallout in radiation? Just bits of radioactive particles strayed from the mushroom cloud explosion that settle on the ground? These bits of matter can be dangerous. If you have had even slight exposure, you may experience these symptoms. You may vomit and feel weak, develop blisters, nausea, spasms, loss of consciousness. There, chump. But by the next day you may feel better. So next time you're hit with a bombshell, don't wait. Act immediately.